Good evening. My name is Ann Shea, and I have the honor of serving as president of the Illinois Patrons of the Arts in the Vatican Museums. The Patrons of the Arts is an international organization dedicated to raising funds for the preservation, care, exhibition, and restoration of the artistic treasures of the 12 museums that comprise the Vatican Museums. Welcome to the third program in our series, Rosa Mystica, A Journey of Renewal and Restoration. For those of you who have been with us for the first two programs, hello again. For those of you who are with us for the first time, we hope you will enjoy your time with us. The Rosa Mystica series showcases magnificent Marian art accompanied by artistic and spiritual commentary. This is the distinctive approach of the Illinois chapter. We bring together artistic and theological perspectives. We are more than art historians and admirers. We bring together art and faith. Tonight's program focuses on Mary, the Sorrowful Mother. To introduce this program, I would like to mention our planetary experience of struggling to offset the effects of the coronavirus. This pandemic has changed all of our lives. As Pope Francis has emphasized, we live in solidarity with one another. As we look to our faith for support in these difficult times, as we do, for all of us, and especially for those who have lost people they love, we bring forward Van Gogh's painting of the Pietà, the sorrowful mother holding the body of her son. This painting hangs in the contemporary gallery of the Vatican Museums. Before we reflect on the art of the Sorrowful Mother, we have two short videos that will give us an idea of the work of the patrons. This video is a video of the completion of a 7-year restoration project on the Holy Stairs, or Scala Santa, just across the street from St. John Lateran in Rome. These stairs are believed to be the stairs trod by Christ on the day of his death. For those of you who have been with us on a Rome trip, many of you have climbed that scaffolding. That in itself was an experience. Let's look at the video.
So friends, I'm here with the Holy Stairs with Paolo Violini. He's been in charge of the restorations here for over 7 years, and we're coming to the very end of a colossal project, many years of delicate restoration. And so I'd just like to ask Paolo today a little bit about his involvement in this wonderful project. And Paolo, si può dire un po' di quando ci è cominciato a lavorare qua?
Sì, noi siamo arrivati al termine di questo ciclo di 7 anni di lavori grazie all'aiuto dei patrons e con i Musei Vaticani, ma in realtà la mia presenza qui risale a molto tempo prima, perché più di 20 anni fa feci i primi saggi di pulitura nella cappella di San Silvestro, quando tutto il santuario era ridotto in condizioni veramente disastrose. Era tutto molto scuro, molto sporco, un po' tralasciato, e addirittura nella cappella di San Silvestro gli intonaci crollavano.
Paolo Violini has been here for more than 20 years. His involvement with this project goes back more than 20 years, and now we're in the last week of restoration. After many years, multi-phases, Paolo, how do you feel? What excitement do you feel after this? Che emozione prova dopo tanta fatica, tanto lavoro?
Quasi è veramente la realizzazione di un sogno, perché negli anni 90 potevamo solo immaginare qualcosa del genere, ma non avevamo una minima idea di cosa sarebbe stato un lavoro così grande. Grazie all'aiuto di tutti siamo arrivati alla conclusione di questo grande progetto.
Grazie a voi Paolo e il suo squadra e tanto lavoro che ha fatto durante questi anni.
Patrons and friends, we are here at the Holy Stair. Emotional moment today. Our restorers are giving the final touches to this major restoration. It took 7 years to be completed. I can see there commitment, they're patient. Often they work in very difficult positions and not very comfortable positions, but it has been a great emotion today to see this restoration completed after 7 years of work. I still remember the scaffolding in the central part. I still remember when we were talking with Paolo Violini about the beginning of this restoration, the difficulties, the chapel of San Lorenzo completed. And today it was the wonderful image I have is the one of the pilgrims climbing up, kneeling on the wooden steps that were restored with the original wood of the 1800s. We gave back this wonderful artwork, this wonderful monument, this wonderful emblem of Christianity to the people. That's the most important thing. And we did that thanks to your help, your support, your commitment. Thank you very, very much. We look forward to welcome you here at the Holy Stair very soon.
Dear patrons and friends, we are arriving at the grand finale of a massive, colossal project, the Holy Stairs. The frescoes of the School of Paul Bril are now completed. This has been a project that goes back more than 20 years. The patrons' involvement goes back several years. So I'm excited to share with you some of the beauty of this wonderful restoration made possible by all of you, and in a particular way to our restoration team at the Vatican. So I'm excited to really just celebrate this victory. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we weren't able to be here in person, but I want to congratulate all of you for your involvement, for your dedication, for your generosity to make this wonderful restoration project possible. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to hand the evening over to Father Lou Camelli. Father Camelli is Cardinal Supage's theologian and a member of the Illinois Patrons Board. He will introduce our second video on our restoration of the Annunciation, supported by the Mazza Foundation. He will also introduce our presenters for this evening's artistic and theological focus on the Sorrowful Mother.
Thank you, Anne. And I want to welcome everyone who's joining us for this third program of the Rosa Mystica series, a journey of renewal and restoration that highlights the image and figure of Mary, the Mother of Jesus, in art. During the first program, participants were introduced to a painting that belongs to the patrimony of the Archdiocese of Chicago. That painting is entitled The Annunciation. It's a beautiful painting, but it also needs restoration. And it also needs a more precise determination of its origin. The patrons of the Vatican Museums, as you know already, sponsor the restoration and conservation of artwork in the Vatican Museums. And the Illinois patrons have decided to take this local painting and to restore it, to conserve it, and also to study its origin. The work of restoration is being carried on by the Conservation Center of Chicago, and additional studies are in place to determine its origin. Now, there's a very exciting possibility that this painting belongs to the school of Ghirlandaio in Florence at the end of the 15th century. Now, what's exciting about this is that the school of Ghirlandaio was the place where Michelangelo was an apprentice. So across these different sessions, we've been following the progress of the work of restoration of this beautiful painting. And now I'd like to introduce a short video that gives an update on the restoration process.
The Conservation Center is honored to assist the patrons of the arts with this important conservation project. The following video features our conservators conducting the first phase of treatment on the Annunciation.
My name is Rebecca Vodnall. I'm the Associate Paintings Conservator at the Conservation Center. When we last left you, we discussed how conservation begins with an examination of the artwork that allows us to formulate a treatment plan. The priority of any treatment plan is to focus on preserving original materials. In the case of this panel, treatment begins with the consolidation of the paint layer. This is one of the most important steps. An adhesive is carefully introduced by painting it onto small losses, raised cracks, and other areas of instability. The adhesive I have chosen to use is isinglass, a type of gelatin made from the bladders of sturgeon. It is applied warm so it can flow under the lifting paint. Once the adhesive has set, I then gently heat set any raised areas of paint using a small hot iron. I first lay down a piece of silicone release mylar to protect the paint surface from the hot iron, then gently warm an area to soften the paint just enough to relax it down into place. This must be done very slowly and carefully. If the paint isn't warm enough, it will shatter. If it is too hot, it will melt. The final step in the process is to remove any excess adhesive on the surface. An area may be consolidated several times to make sure that everything is stabilized. After consolidation comes surface cleaning. Like anything, paintings acquire a layer of dirt and grime over the years. Over time, this layer can become significant enough to affect the look of the artwork, as well as being acidic, abrasive, or damaging. Choosing a suitable cleaning solution requires careful testing. A cleaning solution should be effective at removing the dirt and grime, but not so strong that you risk damaging the paint layer. All colors are tested before we begin fully removing the surface grime, as different colors may be more sensitive. To do the actual cleaning, we hand roll small cotton swabs, not dissimilar to Q-tips, then gently roll the swabs over the surface to lift the grime layer. In the case of this painting, the dirt and grime layer was fairly light, but had a gray appearance on the swab. After surface cleaning, I remove the discolored natural resin varnish. A varnish on a painting has several purposes. First, it is an aesthetic choice. Varnish saturates colors, giving them a richer and deeper appearance. Secondly, varnish is a protective and sacrificial coating. Varnishes are meant to be removed and reapplied as needed. This is not to say that the decision to remove a varnish should be taken lightly, as there is always a risk to removing one. The varnish I am removing in this step does not appear to be the original varnish. In a similar way to choosing a cleaning solution, I choose a solvent or solvent mixture that is strong enough to remove the varnish, but not so strong it damages the paint layer. All colors are tested before we begin fully removing the varnish, as again, different colors may be more sensitive. In the case of this painting, some of the older in-painting is also removed during this step. Removing the hidden varnish layer also reveals additional in-painting under the varnish. Due to the age of this panel, this is not a surprise, but is an important reminder that even with our examination and testing phases, that treatment should proceed carefully and be re-examined at each step. Looking at the painting with the varnish partially removed, you can see how much the discolored varnish has affected the appearance of the panel. The next time we talk, we will be showing you the panel with the varnish and old in-painting completely removed, or rather as much as can be safely removed without damaging the original paint layer. You will be reviewing the panel in a state of what is left from the original artist, hopefully with little to no retouching from later hands. Again though, in conservation, preservation of the original is the most important goal.
For Lent and Passiontide, it seemed appropriate for us to highlight Marian art that captured the spirit of this holy season. And so we're turning to a painting that's from the Vatican Museums. Actually, it's in the Vatican Museum of Contemporary Art. And it is Vincent van Gogh's depiction of the Pietà. This is really a wonderful and engaging work of art. The dead Christ is in the arms of Mary. He's taken down from the cross. And this painting is so evocative. We're going to take a look at it from two different perspectives. The artistry that's involved, but also the theology and spirituality that's in this painting. And to help us consider Van Gogh's Pietà, we have two wonderful commentators. The first is Rebecca Long. And if you have participated already in the Rosa Mystica series, you can remember Rebecca. She is the Patrick G. Ryan and Shirley W. Ryan Associate Curator of Art at the Art Institute of Chicago. Then following Rebecca for the theological and spiritual commentary, we have Father Richard Fragomeni. Father Fragomeni is professor of liturgy and preaching at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. He's also the rector of the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii. I invite you now to listen to their reflections on Van Gogh's Pietà.
We are looking today at Vincent van Gogh's Pietà, part of the Vatican Museum's modern art collection. It was painted in 1889 or 1890, together with a second version, which is now in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, which you're seeing here. Scholars are divided on which may have been the first version. Whichever one was, we know that Van Gogh based his painting on a composition by the artist Eugène Delacroix, made about 1850 and now in the National Museum in Oslo. Van Gogh probably never saw the painting in person. A print, which you see here on the right, was made shortly after Delacroix painted his work. And the print was widely available and widely circulated. We know it was his source, both because he mentions it in letters and because of the visual evidence. The print is the mirror image of Delacroix's original painting, which is how we see the composition also appearing in Van Gogh's interpretation. Van Gogh painted the two versions of the Pietà in either 1889 or 1890, which was around the time in which he had a breakdown and was institutionalized in a mental hospital in the town of Saint-Rémy, following the infamous incident in Arles where he cut off his ear following a fight with his friend and a romantic setback. The friend was his enemy slash friend slash housemate, Paul Gauguin. At the time Van Gogh painted it, he was suffering from a period of tormented religious dreams, which he also mentions in letters to his family. And it's probable that his paintings of the Pietà were a result of this. Rather than replicate the source image from Delacroix, Van Gogh sought to translate the subject and composition through his personal perspective, color, and technique. Spiritual meaning and emotional comfort were expressed through symbolism and color. His brother Theo Van Gogh would later call his paintings in this period some of his best work. Van Gogh discussed his paintings of the Pietà in a letter to his sister Wilhelmina. He wrote, "I don't much like seeing my own paintings in my bedroom, so I've copied one by Delacroix and a few by Millet. The Delacroix is a Pietà, that is to say, the dead Christ with the Mater Dolorosa. The exhausted corpse lies on the ground in the entrance of a cave, the hands held before it on the left side, and the woman behind it. It is the evening after a thunderstorm, and that forlorn figure in blue clothes, the loose clothes are agitated by the wind, is sharply outlined against a sky in which violet clouds with golden edges are floating. She too stretches out her empty arms before her in a large gesture of despair, and one sees the good sturdy hands of a working woman. The shape of the figure with its streaming clothes is nearly as broad as it is high, and the face of the dead man is in the shadow, but the pale head of the woman stands out clearly against a cloud, a contrast which causes those two heads to seem like one somber-hued flower and one pale flower, arranged in such a way as mutually to intensify the effect." In the painting, we see the Virgin Mary at the mouth of what appears to be a cave, presumably the tomb in which Christ is to be interred. Somewhat unusually, she is not actually holding his body, but rather presenting him to the viewer, which is apparent in her gesture. Rather unusually as well, the figure of Christ has red hair and a red beard, which is almost certainly a reference to Van Gogh himself, famously red-haired and red-bearded. Van Gogh's personal identification with the figure of the dead Christ was most likely meant as an expression of his own suffering at the time the painting was made. Interestingly, Van Gogh refers to the Virgin Mary in his painting as a Mater Dolorosa, the Mother of Sorrows. This is another specific iconography in which the Virgin Mary is shown alone in a pose of mourning, as in this version by Titian. Paintings of the Virgin Mary as the Mater Dolorosa were often shown together with images of Christ depicted as the Man of Sorrows, a direct link to the imagery of the Pietà where they are depicted together. The Pietà, and that is from the Latin meaning pity or compassion, depicts the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Jesus, most oftenly in sculpture. The most famous image is perhaps Michelangelo's so-called Vatican Pietà, which I'm showing you here, featuring a preternaturally youthful virgin presenting her dead son to the viewer with an outstretched arm and hand. Her introspective gaze is focused downwards and rather distracted. The Pietà is an abbreviated version of the scene of the Lamentation of Christ, seen here in a famous fresco by Giotto, in which the Virgin and Child are surrounded by other figures. In contrast to the contemplative nature of the Pietà, where Mary and the dead Christ are shown alone and divorced from any narrative context, scenes of the Lamentation highlight the dramatic gestures and expressions of the additional mourners. In the representation of the biblical and extra-biblical narratives of the death of Christ, the Lamentation is preceded by the scene of the lowering of Christ's body from the cross, the so-called deposition, which we see here in a famous example by Roger van der Weyden, in which the Virgin's mourning actually takes a posture that physically parallels that of her son. The Pietà and the Lamentation are then followed by the entombment, as seen here in a famous altarpiece by Caravaggio, which is now in the Vatican museums. It originally was made to hang over an altar of the church in Rome known as the Chiesa Nuova. Here the apostles are seen lowering the body of Christ into the tomb, represented by the protruding slab of rock that would have served as its door, with the mourners onlooking. The Virgin Mary in the back, wearing blue, makes a gesture of blessing with her hand extended and the palm turned downward, similar to the posture of one of her hands in the painting by Van Gogh. Interestingly, Caravaggio is one of the few artists to depict Mary at an appropriate age, rather than featuring her as timelessly youthful as Michelangelo had done, and as we see perhaps in Van Gogh's painting as well. The iconography of the Pietà was developed in Germany around the year 1300, where it is called a Vesper build, or an image of Vespers. Early versions of this iconography are frequently gruesome, as you see here, focusing on the wounds and the suffering of Christ and the Virgin's extreme grief. These sculptures were of a size that was meant for private devotion rather than decorating an altar in a church, either for the home or most likely for small private altars in convents where the nuns would direct their prayers to their female advocate, the Sorrowful Virgin. The reference to the canonical hour of Vespers in the word Vesper build ties these images to the prayer service undertaken in the evening around 6 o'clock. It is just one aspect of the imagery that draws a parallel between Christ's death and his sleep. Images of the life of Christ began at his miraculous conception and scenes of the Annunciation, as we had seen earlier, where the Archangel Gabriel announces the forthcoming birth of Christ, miraculous birth of Christ to the Virgin Mary. Artists were challenged by how to depict this mystical event. In the painting that we had seen previously, seen here, Christ reaches the Virgin Mary in the form of a dove sent by God the Father. Other artists were more literal in their depictions of the incarnation of Christ, showing the Virgin being sent to the Virgin Mary as a small Christ child. And this famous painting in the cloisters in New York, where you see the Annunciation taking place in a 15th century home in Bruges, or as if it were in a 15th century home in Bruges. And now I'm showing you a detail of that, where you can see that the artist has depicted the incarnation of Christ as a small Christ child flying through the air carrying a cross, alluding to his eventual death even before the fact of his birth, as we see here. The prefiguration of Christ's sacrifice and death is also often seen in depictions of his birth, where his sleeping form conjures images of death, as in this Adoration of the Shepherds or nativity scene, where the shepherds are appearing here as a parallel to the mourners that we see in images of the lamentation after his death. More intimate images of the Virgin and sleeping Christ child form an even closer parallel to images of the Pietà, where the figures of Mary and Christ here are isolated from any narrative and shown alone, with the Virgin praying over her sleeping son, who appears as if he's dead. In this case, the baby is laid out on a marble slab, which is a direct reference to the altar table, and therefore to the sacrifice of his body in communion. And the black pillow that he lays on is also another reference to death. Parallel images to the sleeping Christ child is perhaps this rather jarring painting by Andrea Mantegna, showing a mourning Virgin and John the Evangelist tucked in at the left side, kneeling next to the tomb slab on which the body of Christ lays. In considering the parallels in the art history between sleep and death, we should reflect again on Van Gogh's letter to his sister, in which he describes his very personal vision of the Pietà imagery, where the traditional iconography of the dead Christ is whipped into high emotion through his highly energetic personalized brushwork and his expressionistic color palette. At the beginning of his comments in the letter to his sister, he remarkably notes that he does not normally like to display his own artwork in his bedroom, which was for him his inner sanctum and his retreat in the house that he shared rather tumultuously with Paul Gauguin, implying, in other words, that this painting of the Pietà is an exception to his normal rule. In his place of sleep and retreat, which we see him depicting here in a painting at the Art Institute, almost a portrait of his bedroom, he makes an exception in displaying his own Vesper build, his highly personal, contemplative image of the dead Christ. Thank you.
Welcome to the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii, a place to pray for peace here in the Archdiocese of Chicago. I am Father Richard Fragomeni. I'm the rector here, and on behalf of our whole staff and our shrine board, I welcome you to this wonderful moment where I have the opportunity to share with you some theological reflections, some spiritual thoughts about Van Gogh's wonderful Pietà that Rebecca has just spoken to us about. We are recording this on Friday, the 26th of February, Friday afternoon, and we have just finished the Stations of the Cross here. And as we were doing the Stations of the Cross, I looked at that 13th station where Jesus is taken down from the cross and his body is placed into the arms of his Blessed Mother. And as I was meditating on that station this afternoon, it dawned on me that this is indeed the inspirational moment, that narrative that was given to us in these stations by St. Francis of Assisi way back in the 13th century. That this moment that's not in the Bible, but this moment of the descent from the cross and laying in the hands of the Blessed Mother was the inspirational moment that inspired so many of artists through the centuries, as Rebecca has shown, including those wonderful images from the German convents of the wood carvings of the mothers holding their dead son, presenting Christ to us. Throughout all of them, and certainly leading right up to the Van Gogh image that we're meditating upon, inspired by the Delacroix image, all of these, the Pietà of Michelangelo that you saw, all of them were inspired by this 13th station. This moment where Christ is taken down from the cross and laid in the arms of his mother. It's an icon of sorts. It's an icon that opens up a lot of emotions and a lot of thoughts and a lot of images. It's an icon that awakens within me and certainly within those who are parents what my friends who are married tell me is the greatest fear of any parent. I did a survey in preparation for this meditation. I asked 5 young parents with children, what is their greatest fear? And to the person, they said the same thing. They said the greatest fear is the fear of losing a child. And here we have it. Mary has lost her son and is holding him in her arms in sleep, the sleep of death, rocking him as it were, as with a lullaby, rocking him as it were in the sleep of death and in the agony of her own soul that's pierced by the sword. And so I'd like to share 3 ideas with you, 3 experiences with you as my reflection upon this image, the Van Gogh image, because as you heard, this image of Christ is the face of Van Gogh himself. He painted it as a self-portrait on the dead Christ being held by the Divine Mother, by the Heavenly Mother. And this was certainly hung in his bedroom during his time in the asylum, suffering as he was. And so I want to share 3 images that come forward out of this icon from my own life and from what I heard from these young parents. The first is my mother. My brother died suddenly, and my mother, whose name was also Mary, held his body in death. And like the Pietà, she held my brother and then laid him into the grave, into burial. And when the funeral was all done, my mother said to me, I prayed for only 2 things in my life. And then she recounted those 5 parents I visited. She said, I prayed that I never would see my children die. And then she said, I prayed that if they were to die, that I'd have enough courage and strength to get through it. And then she said, God did not answer my first prayer, but I pray that he answers my second prayer. And he did. She had strength that she needed to get through this horrific loss. Then she told me the death of a child is so horrific that we don't even have a name for it, a word for it in English, she said. She said when a husband dies, the woman is called a widow, and if a wife dies, the man is called a widower. And if parents die, the children are called orphans. But what if a child dies? There's no name for that in the English language because the experience is so horrific. My mother was given the courage, and she was given the courage by associating herself with the Pietà, with associating herself like Van Gogh did in the arms of Mary. She gave herself into the arms of Mary, the mother of Christ, who knew what it was to lose a child, and she did find the courage she needed to get through this. And certainly at this time of pandemic, at this time of our world where so many of our young people are dying either by overdose or suicide, we commend them into the hands of the Mother of God. Or when we find ourselves now at the 500,000 point of COVID deaths, the grief of parents and children losing their parents, not be able to see their parents on their deathbeds, we commend them all into the loving hands of Mary, the Mother of God, the Pietà, so that she may show compassion and mercy to parents who have lost children. to parents who've experienced the need for the strength and courage of Mary, who held her dead son in her arms. The second image that comes to mind is that Mary, in all of these images of the Pietà, seems to present her son to us, in the love and in the pride and in the memory of her child. She seems to be presenting us Christ. And it brought to memory an image that happened here in this neighborhood maybe 20 years ago. I had visited the deathbed of a dying boy, and 16-year-old. The parents were distraught. We anointed him. He was semi-conscious. He died of some blood disease. And the parents were distraught by this whole thing. And then the word got through the neighborhood a few days later that he had died. And so the neighbors, we went to the door. And the funeral director had been there and gone in and had prepared the body to be taken out of the house. And as you well know, they present these bodies in a body bag. So the neighbors were all standing there, if you could picture it, and the stairs were at an incline, and the body of this young 16-year-old was coming out of the house in a body bag. And the mother stopped the movement of the attendants. The funeral director and his attendants stopped. And she unzipped the bag, and she showed the beautiful face of her son. And there was simply silence at the steps as she, like Mary, presenting Christ to us, presented her son in proudness and in love. She presented him in her grief. And we all wept, and still the emotion arises in me as I tell this story, because death may end a life, but not a relationship. And the relationship that she wished to continue to share with us was the relationship of her love and her pride and joy. Her boy who had died, like Mary, presenting to us the Christ in the pride and the joy of the love not only that she felt for him, but the memory of that, the love of the Christ who loved us to death on a cross. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, and the Son gave his life for us as a sign of love. Just like that mother presented her child, so Mary presents us with this memory. A memory that is not simply a recounting, but a living memory that instills in us the pride and the grief and the joy and the sorrow of our own deaths and the deaths that we are given, the deaths of others whom we love, but the assurance of our Christian faith that the communion of saints is alive as we present ourselves in the thin veil of this life where the living and the dead come together. And the presentation of Christ to us and the presentation of that mother showing us her beloved Son's face is the presentation of a love that endures death, a love that goes beyond death, a love that can never die. The love of God in Christ Jesus, given to us in our human experience of even burying our children. The promise that even in that grief, we are held by a divine mother. We are held by Mary. We are held in the promise and the hope in Christ Jesus. And this leads to the third and fine image. The final image that gets summoned up by seeing these images of the Pietà, the third one for me, is the image of the tomb. The tomb. Because there you see in the Van Gogh image that Mary, summoning us to the body of her son, is placing him in the tomb, in a cave. But the cave is the entry into the eternal rest that isn't rest, but an action of grace. Because as she lays him into the tomb, it reminded me of Holy Saturday. And the image in the Orthodox tradition, the icon of Holy Saturday, the Anastasis icon, where Jesus is placed in the tomb, his body is placed in the tomb, but then he descends into hell. He doesn't just sleep or rest there, but in the iconography of the Greeks, the image is that he descends into hell, and there, in his death, he pulls out Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah. He pulls them all out of the grave into the promise of an eternal dwelling place with God. With radiant wounds at his hand, the staff in his hand, he raises them up from the grave into the promise that we have all been given in the grave of baptism, because we too have been buried already. We have been called to die before we die in the waters of baptism, so that when we die, there's not much left of us to die, and even the deepest sorrow and pain of losing a child is swallowed up in the hope and the promise of Christ, who dies our death and rises by raising us up from Hades, the underworld, raises us up from death into the promise of everlasting life. A communion where there will be no more tears and no more mourning and no more sorrow, where the Mother of God has already gone before us in her assumption, raised in a resurrection as she is. Mary ready to greet us all with the open arms of Van Gogh's image and the open arms of Christ into the glory of God in the life-giving Spirit and in a communion of saints where we will meet again. And the sorrows that we experience will become, if you would, the purifying of our hearts to experience the joy of God and to be held in peace forever. This is the promise that my mother prayed for. That I'd have the courage, she said, if I lose a child. It was her faith. It's the faith of the church. It was the faith of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And it was the faith of that mother who showed the face of her dead son to us, until our faces are all made radiant in the light of God, where our faces may truly shine with the glory of Christ.
Thank you, Rebecca Long and Father Richard Fragomeni. I'm sure that many of us have been engaged both artistically and theologically by your presentations. I would now like to introduce Father Jack Wall, Cardinal Cupige's representative of the Illinois Patrons.
It's my honor to invite you to join us in protecting the priceless cultural wonders of these most important Vatican museums, so that they may continue to inspire people from around the world for generations to come. Your membership will support ongoing restoration work and critical conservation projects, along with capital improvements and the critical equipment needed for the restoration laboratories. Your support will also allow for the acquisition of valuable artwork and hiring and development of highly specialized restorers. In addition to these deep satisfaction that comes from your participation in these conservation and restoration projects, other significant benefits of membership include complimentary entrance and tour of the Vatican museums, the ability to view some areas of the museum closed to the public, and the opportunity to tour the restoration laboratories. You will also receive a subscription to the Patron of the Arts newsletter from the International Director and invitations to Illinois chapter members-only events and fundraising events. So I enthusiastically invite you to become a patron. Membership dues are $250 for clergy members, $250 for associate members under 35, $600 for an individual membership, and $1,200 for a family membership that includes 2 adults and children under 18. So contact us. You can reach us at our website, VaticanPatronsChicago.org/membership, or call us at 312-534-5351. Or you can email us at illinoispatrons@gmail.com. Thank you so very, very much for your interest and your support.
Thank you for being with us. Our next Rosa Mystica program on May 11th is Mary, the Mother of All Nations. Rebecca Long will present the artistic perspective, John Shea will present the theological perspective, and Mary Ellen O'Hare-Lavin, a Jungian psychologist, will present the psychological perspective. Thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to being with you in May.